Alright, here goes. This has been weighing on me since last weekend, and I really need some perspective because I can't stop replaying the whole situation in my head. For some context, have always been close to my younger sister, Sarah. We've had a good relationship for most of our lives, nothing overly dramatic, and we've always been there for each other when it mattered. Sarah has 2 kids, Jake 7 male and Emma 4 female. I adore my niece and nephew. I've always been the cool aunt who's happy to babysit when needed, spoil them on birthdays, and show up with the fun crafts and games. My kids are older now, so I don't get to do those little kid activities as much, and honestly, it's fun to get to relive that when I'm around them. I've always felt like I had a good relationship with Jake and Emma, and Sarah has always seemed to appreciate my help. So, last weekend, Sarah called me up and asked if I could babysit. She had a friend's birthday party to attend, and her usual sitter wasn't available. I didn't hesitate to say yes. I knew it would be a late night since the party started at 7 p.m., but I figured I could handle it. I told Sarah to give me a quick rundown of her rules and routines, and she did. Bedtime for both kids at 8:30 p.m., no screens or tablets after 8 p.m., and snacks were fine but no sugary treats before bed. She was pretty firm on the screen rule, emphasizing that Jake especially needs a break from his tablet at night because he struggles to wind down otherwise. No problem, I thought. I've handled way worse with my own kids. When she dropped them off, everything started out great. The kids were in a good mood, and we had a lot of fun. Emma and I spent some time coloring while Jake showed me his latest Lego creation. He's really creative and loves showing off his inventions, which I always encourage because it's adorable. We even squeezed in a game of hide and seek before dinner. I made spaghetti, which is apparently a favorite for both of them, and dinner went smoothly. Jake did mention wanting to watch a movie after dinner, but I gently reminded him that we could read a book or play a quiet game instead since screens weren't allowed after 8 p.m. He seemed a little disappointed but didn't push back at that point. The trouble started when bedtime rolled around. Emma, being the sweet and easygoing 4-year-old she is, brushed her teeth, got into her pajamas, and settled down with her favorite stuffed animal without any issues. Jake, on the other hand, became a completely different kid. It started with him asking for his tablet. I calmly reminded him about the rule his mom had set. No screens after 8 p.m. He immediately protested, saying, "But mom lets me use it before bed all the time." I knew this was probably an attempt to test boundaries, so I calmly explained that his mom had specifically told me no screens tonight. That's when things escalated. He went from pleading to outright demanding, saying it wasn't fair and that I was being mean. I stuck to my guns, telling him that while I understood he was upset, we needed to follow the rules his mom set. He stormed off to the living room, flopping dramatically onto the couch and pouting. I gave him a few minutes to cool down before going to check on him, but when I suggested we read a book or play a card game instead, he shouted, "I don't want to, I want my tablet." And then it happened. He grabbed his dinner plate, which still had some spaghetti sauce on it, and threw it at me. I froze. It hit me square in the chest, splattering sauce all over my sweater, jeans, and the carpet. I was in shock. This wasn't just a tantrum, it was a full-blown meltdown, and it was directed at me in a way that felt incredibly personal. Emma, who had been quietly playing with her doll, burst into tears. Now I had one kid sobbing and one kid screaming at the top of his lungs. I took a deep breath because losing my temper wasn't going to help anyone. I calmly told Jake that his behavior was unacceptable and that we needed to clean up the mess together. Of course, he refused at first, screaming, "I hate you. You're not fun like mom." That one hurt, but I pushed through. I managed to get him to help me pick up the plate and clean the carpet, though it was more me than him doing the actual cleaning. Once the immediate chaos was dealt with, I got Emma to bed, reassuring her that everything was okay, and then focused on Jake again. It took over an hour of negotiating, calming, and redirecting to finally get him into his pajamas and into bed. By the time both kids were asleep, I was physically and emotionally drained. My sweater was ruined, my living room still had faint spaghetti stains, and I felt like I'd just run a marathon. But hey, I thought, at least I handled it. Sarah would probably be grateful that I didn't call her in the middle of the party to come home early. The next morning, Sarah came to pick up the kids, and I was expecting a thank you or at least some acknowledgement of the effort I'd put in. Instead, she walked in, took one look at my stained sweater, and immediately asked, "What happened here?" I explained what had happened, thinking she'd be shocked at Jake's behavior and grateful that I'd managed to handle it without calling her. But no, instead of thanking me, she berated me. She said I should have just let Jake use his tablet because that's how he self-soothes, and accused me of making things harder for both myself and her. She went on to say that I need to educate myself on modern parenting and that I'd made the situation worse by being too rigid. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I calmly reminded her that I'd been following her rules, the ones she'd explicitly laid out before leaving. She rolled her eyes and said, "Well, you should have used common sense." At that point, I'd had enough. I told her that if she was going to criticize me for enforcing her rules and not letting her son walk all over me, then maybe she should find someone else to babysit next time. She called me dramatic and said I was punishing her for no reason. That really stung because I felt like I'd gone above and beyond to help her, and instead of being grateful, she was blaming me for her son's behavior. Now I'm questioning everything. Was I too harsh for saying I wouldn't babysit again? Should I have just handed Jake the tablet to avoid the meltdown? Or is Sarah projecting her own stress onto me because she's overwhelmed? I genuinely don't know, but the whole situation has left me feeling hurt and unappreciated. So, Reddit, Ada. Update 1. Alright, here's the continuation. This still has me shaking my head because, honestly, I can't believe the audacity of my sister at this point. After the whole babysitting fiasco last weekend, I was pretty much done. I had spent days replaying the events in my head, questioning if I had handled things wrong or if I had been too harsh in telling Sarah she might need to find someone else to babysit next time. I came to the conclusion that I hadn't done anything wrong. I had followed her rules, stayed calm through a chaotic situation, and still managed to get both kids to bed without calling her to come home. For her to turn around and criticize me for how I handled it, after I literally bent over backward to help her, was just absurd. So, a few days later, I was still feeling a bit raw about the whole thing when Sarah called me again. At first, I assumed she was calling to apologize, maybe even thank me for helping her out. But no, she asked me if I could babysit Jake and Emma again that upcoming weekend. Apparently, she had another social event she wanted to attend, and she didn't have anyone else available to watch the kids. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to ask me after everything that had happened. I told her flat out that I didn't think it was a good idea, especially since she had made it clear she didn't like the way I handled things last time. I said that I didn't want to put myself in a position where I'd be criticized again for trying to enforce her own rules. Sarah brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal and started pushing me to agree, saying I was overreacting and that it would be good training for me to learn how to handle kids like Jake better. That one made me laugh out loud. I told her I've been raising kids for nearly 2 decades, including one with special needs, and I'm more than qualified to handle a tantrum or two. If anything, she needed to figure out what she wanted when it came to her parenting approach because her conflicting rules were making things impossible for anyone trying to help her. To my surprise, she actually backed down a bit after that. She admitted she might have been too harsh on me the last time and asked again if I could help her out. I was still hesitant, but at the same time, I didn't want to punish my niece and nephew for Sarah's behavior. I decided to give it one more shot, but only because I didn't want to let the kids down. I made it clear that I would follow her instructions, whatever they were, but she needed to make up her mind about what those instructions were going to be. She agreed, and I told myself I'd give her the benefit of the doubt. The weekend rolled around, and Sarah dropped the kids off. Things started off okay again, just like the last time. Jake and Emma were excited to see me, and we spent the afternoon playing games and doing crafts. Dinner went smoothly too, though I could see Jake starting to test boundaries as bedtime approached. I had already decided that this time, I wasn't going to fight him over the tablet. Sarah had made it clear that she thought giving him the tablet was the right move, so I figured I'd follow her lead. When 8 p.m. hit, Jake predictably started asking for his tablet. Instead of sticking to the no screens rule like last time, I handed it over. He immediately settled down on the couch and started playing a game, and I thought, well, that was easy. Emma, as usual, was a breeze, teeth brushed, pajamas on, and in bed without any fuss. Jake, meanwhile, stayed glued to the tablet. I kept waiting for him to get tired and put it down on his own, but he didn't. He just kept playing, completely absorbed. I didn't want to risk another meltdown by taking it away, so I let him be. Before I knew it, it was almost 11 p.m., and he was still on the tablet. At this point, I realized I probably should have set a time limit, but I didn't want to deal with the fallout of trying to enforce it. I got him to put it down eventually by promising him he could play again tomorrow, and he finally went to bed without much resistance. I figured Sarah would be happy when I told her there were no tantrums or major issues. The next morning, Sarah came to pick up the kids, and I told her how things had gone. I mentioned that Jake had stayed calm because I gave him the tablet and let him use it for a while before bed. I didn't think much of it. I was just following what I thought were her preferences based on our last conversation. But instead of being happy, she got upset. She asked me why I had let him stay on the tablet for so long, saying it wasn't good for him to be using screens right before bed. I was floored. Wasn't this exactly what she had criticized me for not doing last time? I reminded her that she had specifically told me to let him use the tablet to self-soothe and that I had been trying to avoid another meltdown like the one from before. She rolled her eyes and said, "Yes, but I didn't mean you should let him sit on it for hours. You should have given it to him for 10 or 15 minutes and then taken it away." At this point, I didn't even know what to say. She was contradicting herself again, and no matter what I did, it seemed like I couldn't win. I pointed out that if she wanted a specific approach, she needed to communicate that clearly instead of leaving me to guess and then criticizing me afterward. She waved me off and started ranting about how I just don't understand Jake and how I'm not good at managing kids like him. That one really stung, considering I was honestly shocked by the absurdity of it all. Here I was, trying my best to help her out, following what I thought were her preferences, and still getting criticized for it. At that point, I decided I was done. I told her that if she didn't trust me to handle her kids the way she wanted, then she needed to find someone else to babysit in the future because I wasn't going to keep putting myself in this position. She huffed and said something about how she'd figure it out, then left without so much as a thank you. So here I am, once again questioning if I'm the problem or if Sarah just doesn't realize how unreasonable she's being. I love my niece and nephew, but I can't keep putting myself through this cycle of conflicting instructions, meltdowns, and criticism. At this point, I'm honestly wondering if I should just bow out of babysitting altogether. Update 2. After the last babysitting fiasco, I had firmly decided I was done. I love my niece and nephew, but I realized that no matter what I did, it was never going to be good enough for Sarah. I tried enforcing her rules, she got mad. I tried doing what I thought she wanted, she got mad. It was a no-win situation, and I wasn't going to keep putting myself in the firing line. So, when a few days passed and Sarah called me again, asking me to babysit, I didn't hesitate. I said no. She sounded genuinely taken aback, probably because she wasn't used to hearing me say no. I've always been the type of person who wants to help, especially when it comes to family, and Sarah has definitely taken advantage of that over the years. I've always been the go-to when she needed last-minute help, whether it was babysitting, running errands, or just being a sounding board for her endless complaints about life. I think she's come to expect that I'll always be there, no questions asked. So when I refused, it clearly threw her off. She stumbled over her words a bit, asking why I couldn't babysit this time, as if the idea of me having other priorities or boundaries was unfathomable. I kept my response simple. I told her flat out that I wasn't interested. No excuses, no softening the blow, just a straightforward refusal. Honestly, it felt empowering. For once, I wasn't bending over backward to accommodate her, and it felt like reclaiming a bit of my time and sanity. I didn't see the point in going into much detail about my reasoning, partly because I knew she wouldn't really listen and partly because I didn't feel like I owed her an explanation. It wasn't going to work for me, and that was the end of it as far as I was concerned. I thought that would be the end of the conversation, but of course, it wasn't. Sarah doesn't take no for an answer, especially not when she's determined to get what she wants. Later that day, my phone buzzed with another call from her. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I figured it was better to rip the band-aid off and deal with it directly. As soon as I answered, she launched into another plea, telling me how much she needed someone to watch the kids because her friend was hosting a dinner party, and it was important that she attend. She didn't ask if I was busy or had plans, she just assumed that whatever I had going on wasn't as important as her social life. I told her no again, but this time I decided to spell out exactly why. I told her I was tired of being criticized every time I helped her, that I was exhausted from her constant nitpicking and backtracking, and that I was done being the scapegoat for her frustrations. I pointed out how absurd it was to be scolded for following her instructions or for not following them in exactly the way she wanted, even though she never seemed clear on what that was. I made it clear that I wasn't willing to put myself in that position again because, frankly, it was exhausting and thankless. Instead of acknowledging what I was saying, Sarah immediately brushed it off. It was like she couldn't even entertain the idea that she might have been in the wrong. She told me I was being overly dramatic and acting like a martyr over something that wasn't a big deal. According to her, I was making up stories and exaggerating what had happened. She dismissed everything I said, reducing my legitimate frustrations to me holding a petty grudge. Then, as if none of that mattered, she asked me again to babysit. It was almost surreal, like we weren't even having the same conversation. She acted like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened and seemed to think that if she just kept asking, I'd eventually cave. But I didn't. I stood firm and told her no, for the third time. That's when the name-calling started. She told me I was being selfish and that I wasn't thinking about how hard things are for her. She said that as her sister, I should be willing to step up and help her out, especially since she doesn't have a lot of people to rely on. She even tried guilt-tripping me, saying how much the kids loved spending time with me and how I was punishing them by refusing to babysit. It stung, of course. I adore Jake and Emma, and the thought of them feeling let down by me broke my heart. But at the same time, I wasn't going to let Sarah manipulate me into doing something that I knew would just lead to more stress and conflict. Eventually, the conversation ended with her hanging up on me. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. A part of me was relieved that the call was over, but another part of me was seething. How could she dismiss everything I said, completely ignore my boundaries, and then hang up like I was the one being unreasonable? I thought that was the end of it after all. I had been clear about my stance. But oh no, it was just the beginning. A little later, my mom called me. I saw her name pop up on the screen, and I instantly knew what this was about. Sure enough, as soon as I answered, she launched into it. Apparently, Sarah had gone straight to her after our call and told her everything, or, more accurately, her version of everything. Based on what my mom was saying, it was clear that Sarah had painted herself as the victim in this situation. She'd conveniently left out any mention of her criticisms, contradictions, or the way she had dismissed my feelings. Instead, she'd framed it as me refusing to help her in her time of need for no good reason, and my mom was eating it up. Before I could even get a word in, my mom was already chastising me. She wanted to know why I had refused to help Sarah, and she didn't wait for an answer before telling me that I should have said yes. She went on about how family is supposed to support each other, how I needed to put my feelings aside, and how I should be the bigger person, because that's what family does. Her tone wasn't angry, exactly, it was more disappointed, like she couldn't believe I would refuse to help my own sister. It stung, but it also made me furious because she wasn't even giving me a chance to explain my side. When I finally managed to get a word in, I tried to explain the situation to her. I told her about Jake's tantrums, the conflicting instructions Sarah had given me, and how she had criticized me no matter what I did. I told her how it felt like I was walking on eggshells every time I helped out, knowing that I'd be blamed for something no matter how hard I tried. I reminded her of the countless times I'd stepped up for Sarah in the past, only to be met with ingratitude or criticism, I thought she'd understand. I thought she'd at least acknowledge that I had a valid reason for saying no this time. But instead, she doubled down. She dismissed everything I said, chalking it all up to Sarah being stressed. She's probably just overwhelmed, my mom said, as if that excused her behavior. She told me I needed to cut Sarah some slack, to let it go, to stop making a big deal out of it. She said that as the older sister, I should be smarter and more understanding, that I should rise above it and help her out because that's what family is supposed to do. According to her, it didn't matter if Sarah was being unreasonable. What mattered was that she needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. I was floored. I couldn't believe my mom was taking Sarah's side after everything I'd been through. It felt like no one was listening to me, like my feelings didn't matter because, somehow, I was the one who was always supposed to fix everything. I was the one who was expected to put my needs and boundaries aside for the sake of family, while Sarah got to do whatever she wanted without consequences. I couldn't understand why it was always on me to be the bigger person, to compromise, to clean up the messes that weren't mine to begin with. I asked my mom why it was always on me to be the bigger person. Why was it always my responsibility to keep the peace, to step in, to sacrifice my time and energy when Sarah clearly didn't appreciate it? Why was I the one being told to let it go, while Sarah was allowed to behave however she wanted without anyone calling her out? My mom didn't have an answer for that. She just kept repeating the same thing over and over. Sarah is your sister. Family helps family. That's just how it is. It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter how much I tried to explain my side, it was clear my mom wasn't going to see it my way. In her eyes, Sarah was the stressed-out younger sister who needed support, and I was the older sister who was supposed to give it, no questions asked. It didn't matter how unfair the situation was or how much it was taking a toll on me. It didn't matter that I had valid reasons for saying no. All that mattered was that Sarah had called for help, and I had refused. To my mom, that was the ultimate betrayal. The whole conversation left me feeling completely drained. I love my family, but I can't help feeling like they take me for granted. It's like they expect me to always be available, to always say yes, to always be the one to compromise, while Sarah gets a free pass to be as difficult as she wants. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's healthy for me to keep putting myself in these situations just to appease them. So now I'm stuck in this weird place where I feel guilty for saying no, but at the same time, I know I can't keep doing this. I know if I give in again, it'll just reinforce the idea that my boundaries don't matter, that I'll always cave eventually. But the guilt is real, and part of me wonders if I'm the one who's being unreasonable. Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to help my sister, or am I right to finally stand my ground? Because right now, I feel like no matter what I do, I'm going to be the bad guy in someone's eyes.